Hey, so I am creating a video to answer this question that I see come up sometimes when it comes to making connections with people. I have a comment here from a user called Holly Molly 25. This person is saying that they are using the what I call the interview technique when it comes to making conversations, where they keep asking people questions to allow them to talk about themselves. But what they've noticed is that nobody asks them anything back, and they feel like they're not really interesting, and they feel like they're not being tolerated. Um, and this person is expressing that they're frustrated that they haven't made a lot of meaningful connections in the last few years. So, I have a few points here that I want to quickly make about this idea of the interview process and why I actually don't think it's that great an idea. And hopefully I can give you something that helps with that a little bit more. So, the first problem with the interview process is that interview process meaning in a conversation between you and this other person, all you're doing is you're asking questions and you're not giving anything in return. The first problem with that is it can feel a bit draining for both parties involved. If you think about a connection, a conversation is about two people sharing and listening. The interview process is only doing one side of that. And for the person asking the questions, it could feel very frustrating because it feels like you always have to keep the other person talking. That could be very anxiety inducing as well. And for the person receiving the questions, it could feel quite uncomfortable as well because it feels like an interview. It feels like you're being bombarded by questions. Because you're essentially asking the other person to keep sharing things about themselves. And when they're in an environment, when someone is in an environment where all they do is sharing, all they're doing is sharing about themselves, but they're not receiving anything in return about the person they're talking with. It feels like you're giving a lot without having anything in return. So that is the first problem with the interview process. Now, the second problem, this one a lot of people don't really realize, and the person who asked me this question has highlighted it as well. So I'm quoting them here. Nobody asks me anything back. What that is telling me is people who perform the interview process, the interview technique for making conversations, is that they are asking for permission to share. They are thinking that if I ask other people questions, they should ask me questions back, and then I get to open up about myself. The problem with that is you're waiting for permission to speak. Um, so you're waiting on the other person to give you permission to speak, and you can't control the other person. So if you want to share about yourself and you're constantly waiting for the other person to give you permission to speak, you might have to wait a long time. So that's the problem with the permission side of things. So right now I want to give you 3 simple tips that could help get you out of the interview technique a little bit more and start talking about yourself more. Now, I'm gonna call these 3 tips techniques for now. I want you to realize that as this becomes more natural to you, this will no longer be techniques that you're using. Hopefully, it'll become a natural way that you speak to other people. What I mean is, for now, what the tips I'm giving you might come a little bit unnatural to you, but hopefully with practice, it'll become natural, and it won't feel like you're using strategies to make conversation with people. It'll feel like this is naturally who you are when you speak. So the first tip I have is what I call storytelling. Storytelling is basically me sharing a story about myself. You don't have to make it too long, as long as you share something about yourself to the other person. And the way you can do storytelling in conjunction with asking questions is that listen to what the other person has to say and tell a story about yourself that relates to what they're saying. So you're not just some sort of narcissist that interrupts a conversation and starts talking about yourself. Listen to what the other person is saying and contribute to what they're saying with your own experiences. So that's what storytelling means to me. And the way you can do that is quite simple. Let's say I'm talking to Bob, and Bob is talking about TV shows. Now, there are different stories that I can share about myself to Bob. The first thing might be the TV shows that I'm watching right now and what I find enjoyable about them. I could also listen to the tone and the content, the content beneath what Bob is trying to say. Maybe Bob likes murder mysteries. Then the story I share about myself could be about things that I find fascinating as well, like the way he finds murder mysteries fascinating. Maybe I find martial arts fascinating. I'll talk about that. Maybe I find horror movies interesting, and that relates to murder mysteries in the sense that they're both about mysteries and things that you don't understand just yet. They're both about building tension. So what I'll essentially be doing is I'm matching Bob's intention or energy, but I am contributing to it from my own experiences. It could feel like the imagery I have in my head is two kids building a sandcastle together. They both want to build a castle, but they're both contributing to the castle. So the point is to listen to what the other person wants to talk about and pay attention to what he has said within that you're interested in, and the two of you can start building something that you're both interested in. So the second tip I have is, it relates to the first one, is simply to talk about things that you find enjoyable. And this is where what I said about giving yourself permission to speak is very important. If neither of you are really saying anything and you want to talk to the other person, simply talk about what is interesting on your mind. Let's say I'm in a conversation with you right now. On the top of my head, what I find interesting today is I have a friend who's learning how to ride a bike right now, and I find that fascinating because she's an adult, but for her, she doesn't know how to ride a bike, and it's interesting because she's seeing it as a way to increase her confidence in her physical abilities, and that's something I find interesting. Something else I might find interesting is I'm going to Europe soon. That's something interesting I can talk about. I'm going to Australia soon. That's interesting to me. I can even talk about the weather, as cliche as that is, as long as I'm not using it as small talk. I want to talk about the weather because it's summer over here in New Zealand, and I love the summer. I love the beach, and I started to get into beach volleyball lately, so that's something I find interesting and something I can talk about. As narcissistic as it might seem, as long as I'm not dominating the conversation about just myself. I'm allowing the other person to contribute and to build to the conversation as well. It would allow for connection to potentially happen. And the third tip I have is this. And this might be the simplest thing you can do, but it'll not feel comfortable. Create silence for the other person. Creating silence just means after something has been said, if you don't have anything to contribute to it, don't contribute, just be silent. What I find lately is, because I'm getting more comfortable with silence, I'm less desperate in making friends. I when I talk to new people that I meet, there isn't a sense of desperation in me thinking I don't have enough friends and I want to make more friends. So what I naturally started doing is not caring if a conversation ends or not. That doesn't mean I'm being cold to the other person. It just means if our conversation only lasts for 30 seconds, that's okay. And what I've been finding, what my experience has been with this is that when I've been silent for a little while, the other person, if they want to talk to me, they will start asking me questions that they find interesting, questions that they want to find out about me, like what it is that I do, how long have I been dancing for, because I usually meet people from dancing. And when this happens to you, what you'll find is that it takes a lot of the pressure off, and you realize actually a conversation is made up of two people, so I don't have to be the one to make the effort the whole time, and that's been my experience as well when it comes to creating silence. I simply stop talking, but I'm still sitting next to the other person. My body language is still expressing interest to keep talking. I'm just not saying anything because I can't think of anything to say. And the other person will pick up the ball. The other person will start asking me questions, will start trying to continue the conversation. And that's really all I have to do. Then I start talking. So those are my 3 rudimentary tips. If you have any feedback, leave me a comment down below or just message me directly. I'm keen to hear what your thoughts are.